Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where it was on this day in 1965 that Herman's Hermits, you can see Peter Noon behind me if I go like that, knocked the Rolling Stones' I Can't Get No Satisfaction, otherwise known as Satisfaction, off of the charts. Now, this is very interesting from many perspectives. Satisfaction was considered one of the most raunchy songs of the day because of its overt sexual innuendo, and because it was released relatively early in the Stones' career, the world of the 60s that was slowly emerging from the button-down world of the 50s comparatively, wasn't altogether ready for that, but the young generation did embrace it, just until it was knocked off the top of the charts by a Herman's Hermits take of an old music hall song, I'm Henry the Eighth, I Am. Second verse, same as the first, I'm Henry the Eighth. I could go on. But what does this mean? It means that history is a big lie. And by that, I mean the nuance of reality is lost when people try to look at trends. And we're all guilty of it. I'm guilty of it as of 2 minutes ago. But let's try to rectify our guilt by explaining the nuance of what happens over time. So, not everything in the 60s was sort of raunchy, psychedelic rock and roll with hair growing longer and longer. There were also people like the 101 Strings Orchestra. There was Herb Alpert catering to the easy listening taste of sophisticated urban and middle class people. There were jazz artists, many of whom thought that rock and roll was sort of vulgar and teeny, sort of teeny bopper music that lacked the sonic and harmonic and sonoral sophistication of jazz. Later in the 60s, we see the advent of jazz rock fusion. This was because rock and roll started to mature and become something less bubblegummy than it was, arguably, of course. But in any era, there is more than one trend. Disco was on the charts at the same time Van Halen was on the charts. Motorhead was at least selling a lot of tickets at the same time Duran Duran and a Flock of Seagulls were selling tickets. Frank Sinatra and Elvis coexisted. The Carpenters and Emerson, Lake and Palmer coexisted. Led Zeppelin and John Denver coexisted. And these weren't other universes. They weren't even other parts of the culture. This was music consumed by the white middle class majority in countries like America, Canada, Britain, etc. So what this shows is that if Herman's Hermits were the squeaky clean beat group, which is what they called a lot of rock groups at that time, if they were the squeaky clean beat group of the early and mid 60s, and if the Rolling Stones were the bad boys, it shows that there was more than one trend happening in music. And in addition to that, Peter Noon was a genuinely wonderful entertainer. Just Google him hosting the Midnight Special in the early 70s, and you can see that his infectious smile, his congenial attitude, and his good and memorable voice, because memorable voices are always important voices, he was a genuinely good entertainer who, ironically, in the early 80s, even tried to reinvent himself as a kind of punk musician, and he wasn't bad. But he's always going to be most associated with Herman's Hermits, who had a lot of great hits. Mrs. Brown, You've Got a Lovely Daughter, great wholesome song, I'm Leaning on a Lamp. It's wonderful stuff. And again, there's plenty of room for more than one kind of music. If you can fit more than one genre onto a record shelf or in a record store, let alone on a database of music like Spotify's, then clearly history too is about more than one type of music, both from a sociological point of view and from a technical and genre point of view. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Herman's Hermits are here to prove it, along with Henry the Eighth. Like, subscribe, and we will see you next time. Take care.